She crawled into his bed wearing almost nothing, claiming it was an Apache ritual. He stayed silent. Why? The question would haunt the mountains of the Sierra Nevada for years to come, but on the night of December 12, 1876, it existed only in the frozen air between two strangers who had not yet met. Elijah Carson guided his horse through the last mile of forest trail as darkness swallowed the landscape. The animal moved with the exhausted patience of a creature that had worked hard and knew shelter waited ahead. Its breath came in heavy clouds that hung in the still air before dissipating into the gathering night. Behind them, the eastern peaks had already disappeared into shadow, and ahead, somewhere beyond the stand of towering pines, Lake Tahoe lay silent beneath its winter skin of ice. Eli's shoulders burned with the deep ache that came from 10 hours of swinging an axe. He had spent the entire day clearing fallen timber along the northern fence line, work that could not wait, because winter in these mountains punished procrastination with deadly efficiency. A tree had come down during the last storm, splitting the boundary marker and creating a gap that would let his horse wander if left unrepaired. So he had worked through the cold, through the fatigue, through the familiar companionship of solitude that had defined his life for 4 years. At 39 years old, Eli had learned to measure time not in days or weeks, but in tasks completed. Logs split, fences mended, snow cleared, game hunted. Each action served a purpose beyond survival. Each completed task was another day he had managed to exist without causing harm, without making decisions that cost innocent lives, without being the kind of man he had once been. The cabin appeared through the trees like a dark shadow against darker woods. Small and sturdy, built with his own hands from timber he had cut and shaped and fitted together with the desperate focus of a man who needed any task, no matter how exhausting, to drown out memory. He had chosen this location specifically for its isolation. No roads led here. No neighbors existed within 10 miles. No travelers passed through by accident. It was a place where a man could disappear into the rhythm of survival and ask nothing from the world except to be left alone. But something was wrong. Eli's body registered the wrongness before his conscious mind caught up. The cabin window glowed with firelight, warm, steady, deliberate. He had left that morning in darkness as he always did, and he had extinguished the stove completely as he always did, leaving nothing but cold ashes because a man living alone could not afford carelessness with fire. His hand moved to the rifle secured against his saddle. The motion was automatic, trained into muscle memory by 10 years as a military scout, and 4 more years of living in wilderness, where threats came from animals, weather, and occasionally from men who believed empty land meant lawless land. He dismounted in silence, his boots sinking into snow that had fallen fresh during the afternoon. The horse nickered softly, wanting the warmth of its shelter, but Eli tied it to a low pine branch well away from the cabin. If trouble waited inside, he needed the animal safe and ready for quick departure. The tracks told him everything. A single set of footprints led directly to his door. Bare feet, small, the stride length irregular, suggesting injury or extreme exhaustion. No horse tracks, no boot prints. Whoever had come here had arrived alone on foot without proper clothing in weather that could kill an unprepared person in hours. Eli moved along the cabin's north side, staying low, keeping the wall between himself and the window. He had built this structure with defensive positions in mind, though he had never expected to use them. The side window was small, but strategically placed to allow views of the interior from multiple angles. He pressed close to the rough log wall and peered through the gap in the shutters. The fire in the stove burned with the controlled efficiency of someone who understood how to build heat without wasting fuel. His table sat undisturbed. His few possessions remained exactly where he had left them. The trunk containing his spare clothes showed no signs of tampering. Everything appeared normal except for the bed. She lay curled at the center of his mattress, barely visible beneath the thin sheet she had pulled over herself like inadequate armor. Long black hair spread across his pillow in tangles that spoke of days without care. Her skin, what little he could see in the dim firelight, showed the deep bronze color of indigenous heritage, but it was marked with discoloration that even the poor light could not hide. Bruises, dark and extensive. On her arms, her shoulders visible at the edge of the sheet. Her clothing, what remained of it, hung in tatters that revealed more than they covered, and what they revealed was evidence of violence and desperate flight. Eli's jaw tightened. He had seen this before. Different woman, different place, same desperate story of someone running from men who believed other human beings could be owned like livestock. The sight triggered memories he had spent 4 years trying to bury, but the memories came anyway, sharp and unavoidable. He could turn away, should turn away. His survival here depended on avoiding exactly this kind of complication. Helping her would mean questions, searches, confrontations with whoever was hunting her. It would mean breaking the careful isolation he had built as penance for past failures. But the image of her trembling beneath that inadequate sheet, the way her hand clutched the fabric as if it could protect her from whatever horrors she had fled, reached past his defenses and touched something he thought he had successfully killed. The part of him that still believed some actions mattered, that some choices defined who a man was versus who he had been. The memory came unbidden, as it always did. A different winter, a different woman, young, perhaps 16, clutching a baby, while soldiers surrounded her small shelter. Eli had been there to translate, to facilitate peaceful surrender, but the orders had changed. The commander had decided that mercy looked like weakness. And by the time Eli understood what was happening, by the time he tried to intervene, 23 people lay dead in the snow, including that young woman and her child. He pushed the memory down with practiced force and approached his own door. He opened it slowly, deliberately, making enough noise to announce his presence without creating panic. The hinges creaked with familiar protest. The fire popped and crackled. She did not move, but he saw her breathing change, becoming shallower, more controlled. She was awake. She was listening. She was deciding whether to run or fight, or pray. Inside, the warmth enveloped him after hours in temperatures that had dropped below freezing. He closed the door with careful gentleness and set his rifle against the wall, within easy reach but not threatening, showing intention without creating fear. He removed his hat and hung it on the peg he had carved into the doorframe. Still she did not move. The sheet rose and fell with her breathing, but otherwise she remained motionless, playing dead or sleeping, waiting to see what kind of man walked into his own home to find a stranger in his bed. Eli's eyes adjusted fully to the firelight. Up close, the details became clearer and more disturbing. The bruises on her arms had the distinct shape of fingers, large hands, male hands, gripping hard enough to leave marks that would last for weeks. Her feet, visible at the edge of the sheet, were cut and bloodied, the kind of damage that came from running through rough terrain without shoes. Small cuts covered her ankles and calves where branches and rocks had torn skin. She had run far. She had run desperately. She had run until her body simply refused to carry her any further. He moved to the stove, keeping his movements slow and predictable. From the shelf above, he took down his tin cup and filled it from the water kettle he always kept ready. The water was not hot, but it was clean and cool and safe. He set the cup on the small table beside the bed, close enough for her to reach when she was ready, far enough that she would not feel crowded. Then Eli did something that would have seemed impossible to the man he had been 4 years ago. He opened his trunk, removed the thick wool blanket he saved for the coldest nights, and spread it carefully over her without touching her, without waking her, without expecting anything in return. The blanket settled over the inadequate sheet like a benediction, adding weight and warmth and a promise that tonight at least she would not freeze. She stirred, just slightly. a small intake of breath that told him she had been awake the entire time, watching through slitted eyes, measuring threat level, calculating whether this stranger was another danger or possibly, impossibly, something else. Eli stepped back immediately, creating distance. He moved to the chair beside the stove, the one he had built, facing the fire, but positioned so he could see every corner of the single-room cabin. He sat down heavily, exhaustion finally catching up with him, and deliberately turned his back to her. The gesture was intentional and informed by experience. During his years as a scout, he had worked with enough indigenous tribes to learn that sometimes the greatest sign of respect was to not look to give someone privacy in their vulnerability, to show through action that you recognize their humanity and their right to dignity, even in desperate circumstances. He did not know if she was Apache, as his mind had initially guessed from her features and coloring. Could be Paiute, could be Shoshone, could be mixed heritage, but he knew enough to understand that a woman who had fled into the night and taken refuge in a stranger's home needed to know she was not about to be violated again. The cabin settled into tense silence. Outside wind began to rise, moving through the pines with the sound of distant ocean waves. The fire crackled and shifted. Eli's hands, still cold from hours of outdoor work, slowly absorbed warmth from the stove's radiant heat. Behind him, he heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sound of someone shifting position, testing whether movement would provoke response. Minutes accumulated. 5, 10, perhaps 15. Time moved differently in the space between strangers when one of them was deciding whether to speak or run or simply exist in terrified silence until dawn forced decisions. Finally a voice, barely above a whisper, rough from cold or crying or days without proper water. Apache women may enter a man's shelter when threatened. It is sacred law. Eli did not turn around. He kept his eyes on the fire, watching flames dance across split pine, and he considered the words carefully. He knew enough about indigenous customs to recognize that what she had just said was not entirely accurate. Some tribes had traditions about sanctuary and protection, but the specific phrasing she used, the way she invoked Apache law, felt borrowed rather than lived. She was not Apache. She was reaching for any protection she could claim, hoping that invoking tradition would create a barrier between herself and whatever she feared would happen next. But the truth behind the inadequate lie was clear. She was telling him she had a right to be here. She was asking him, in the only way her exhausted mind could formulate, to honor that right and let her stay. "You are safe here," Eli said. His voice came out rougher than he intended after a day of silence, more quiet. Then the sound of her hand reaching for the cup of water. He heard her drink in small sips, testing, making sure the water did not contain anything besides water. The cup returned to the table with a soft wooden sound. "You need sleep," he added, still not turning. "We can talk when you have rested." He did not know if she would sleep. Trust was not something that returned easily once it had been shattered by violence and betrayal. But he could offer the space for it, and the choice to accept or refuse remained hers. Eli reached for the blanket he kept folded beside his chair, the thinner one he used for exactly this purpose when he chose to spend nights by the fire rather than in his bed. He spread it over his lap and settled into position for what he knew would be a long, uncomfortable night. The chair was not designed for sleeping, but he had endured far worse. He had slept in snow, in mud, in positions where stopping meant dying. A wooden chair beside a warm fire was luxury by comparison. Behind him, her breathing began to change. Not sleep, not yet, but something approaching it. The kind of exhausted collapse that came after days of running on pure survival instinct, after fear, had burned through every reserve of strength after the body finally registered that immediate danger had passed, and it could afford to stop fighting for just a few hours. Eli closed his eyes, though he knew sleep would not come easily. His mind was already working through implications and consequences. Someone would come looking for her. Women did not run this far this desperately through winter mountains unless they were being hunted. And the men who hunted would not stop because of weather or distance or the inconvenience of difficult terrain. They would come with money or weapons or legal documents claiming ownership or marriage rights or guardianship. They would expect compliance from a lone man in an isolated cabin. They would be wrong about what they would find. The old anger stirred in Eli's chest, the specific kind of rage that had gotten him in trouble during his military service, the kind that made him speak up when silence would have been safer, the kind that made him question orders when obedience was expected, the kind that had ultimately put him in position to lead soldiers to the wrong place at the worst possible time, with consequences that haunted every waking moment and most of his dreams. 4 years ago he had come to this cabin believing he deserved nothing but solitude and guilt. He had built these walls as much to keep the world out as to contain his own failures. Every day was an exercise in existing without causing harm, without making choices that affected other lives, without being the kind of man whose decisions ended with innocent people dead in the snow. But now, with this unknown woman sleeping fitfully in his bed, wrapped in his blankets, drinking from his cup, trusting him with a vulnerability she would probably regret, once fear receded enough to allow clear thinking, Eli felt something he had thought permanently dead. Not quite hope, not quite redemption, but the faint, terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could do this one thing right. That maybe one act of protection could not erase 23 deaths, but could at least prove he was capable of being something other than the man who had led soldiers to slaughter innocents. Outside, the temperature continued to fall. Ice formed on the window glass in patterns like frozen ferns. The fire burned lower, and Eli rose once to add more wood, moving with practiced silence, so the sound would not wake her. The flames caught and rose again, casting dancing shadows that made the log walls seem to breathe. He returned to his chair and resumed his vigil. The woman in his bed, whose name he did not yet know, whose story he could only partially guess, had made a choice when she stumbled to his door instead of dying in the forest. She had chosen to believe that a man living alone in the wilderness might be safer than whatever she was fleeing. Eli did not know if that belief was justified. His history suggested otherwise. But he knew with absolute certainty that he would try to be worthy of it. He would try to be the man she needed him to be, even if he had no clear idea how to accomplish that beyond keeping her warm and fed and hidden until they figured out what came next. The night deepened. The wind strengthened, shaking the shutters and howling through the pines with sounds like distant voices. The fire kept burning, and in that small cabin hidden among the snow-covered peaks of the Sierra Nevada, 2 damaged souls began the slow, uncertain process of deciding whether survival could transform into something more. Morning arrived without fanfare or beauty. The sky beyond the cabin window transitioned from black to deep blue to the flat gray of winter dawn, filtered through heavy clouds. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, at least 3 inches, muffling the world. In that particular silence that came when weather transformed landscape into something unrecognizable, Eli had not truly slept. His body had fallen into that half-conscious state soldiers learned where awareness never fully disappeared, and any change in sound or temperature triggered instant alertness. He had added wood to the fire 3 times during the long night. Each time he glanced at the bed to confirm she remained there, remained breathing, remained alive. Each time he saw her still curled beneath the blankets, her breathing steady but shallow, interrupted occasionally by small sounds that suggested her dreams were not peaceful. At 5 in the morning, Eli rose from the chair. His back protested with sharp complaints about angles and pressure points. He ignored the discomfort and moved through his morning routine with deliberate quiet, each action performed with the automatic precision of rituals repeated daily for years. He filled the kettle from the water barrel he kept near the door, using the dipper to transfer liquid without splashing. He measured oats from the sack into the cooking pot, added water stirred, set it on the stove's hottest plate. He started the coffee using beans he had traded for last month, grinding them with the manual grinder that always made more noise than he wanted but could not be avoided. The familiar motions grounded him in normalcy. This was his life. Simple, controlled, predictable, every action serving a clear purpose. No surprises, no complications, no responsibilities beyond keeping himself alive. Except now there was a woman in his bed, and everything had become complicated in ways he could not yet fully calculate. The porridge bubbled softly, and Eli stirred it with the wooden spoon he had carved from oak. When it reached the right consistency, neither too thick nor too thin, he ladled a generous portion into his best wooden bowl. He added a spoonful of honey from the jar Sarah Redbird had traded him for fresh venison last month, stirring until the sweetness distributed evenly through the oats. He set the bowl on the small table beside the bed, close enough to reach far enough to avoid crowding. He did not wake her. Her body would wake when it was ready, when it had extracted enough rest to function, and forcing consciousness before that moment would only delay real healing. Instead, Eli gathered his hunting equipment, the rifle cleaned and loaded, the knife sharpened until it could split hair, the leather bag for carrying game. His meat supplies were running dangerously low after a week of poor hunting, and a man did not survive Sierra Nevada winters by waiting until hunger became desperate before addressing the problem. Outside, the cold struck like a physical blow. The temperature had dropped further during the night, probably into the low teens, and the fresh snow crunched beneath his boots with the particular sound that indicated serious cold. His breath formed thick white clouds that hung in the still air. No wind this morning, just cold and silence and the weight of snow on pine branches. His horse, still tied where he had left it the previous evening, tossed its head in greeting. The animal had survived the night without shelter, as it had many times before, but frost covered its dark coat, and its eyes showed the patient suffering of creatures that endure because they have no choice. "I know," Eli murmured, untying the reins with cold, stiffened fingers. "Should have put you in the lean-to last night. Too distracted." He led the horse to the small three-sided shelter he had built, specifically for this purpose, brushed the frost from its coat with handfuls of dry hay, and made sure it had access to the hay pile and the water trough he had filled before leaving the previous morning. The water had frozen overnight, and Eli spent several minutes breaking the ice with a rock before the horse could drink. With the animal settled and warm, Eli moved into the forest. Rabbit tracks crisscrossed the fresh snow in patterns that told stories about early morning foraging and the constant search for food that defined winter wildlife. He followed the clearest trail with the patience of a man who understood that good hunting required silence time and understanding of prey behavior. The forest swallowed him. Pine and fir rose on all sides, their branches heavy with snow that occasionally fell in soft collapses when wind disturbed their balance. The cold sharpened every sense. Sound carried differently in winter air. The distant call of a crow. The crack of a branch under too much snow weight. The soft pad of his own boots on the trail. He found the warren within 90 minutes, a network of holes and runs beneath a rocky outcropping that provided shelter from weather and predators. He set 3 snares with practiced efficiency, using thin wire and strategic placement to create traps that would kill quickly rather than causing prolonged suffering. Then he waited patient and still, in a position downwind where his scent would not alert prey. 2 rabbits, young, healthy, clean kills that meant fresh meat for several days, and the knowledge that he had taken only what he needed, leaving the warren intact to breed and maintain population for future hunting. By the time Eli returned to the cabin, The sun had cleared the eastern peaks, though heavy clouds filtered its light into something gray and weak. Smoke rose from his chimney in a steady column, which meant someone had added wood to the fire. Someone had woken up. His hand tightened on the rifle automatic response to unexpected change. Then he consciously relaxed his grip. She was not a threat. She was frightened, cold, injured, and trying to make herself useful in the only way her exhausted mind could conceive, adding wood to a fire, maintaining warmth, proving she was worth the resources she was consuming. He pushed open the door to find her standing near the stove, one hand gripping the table edge for support, her legs trembling with the effort of remaining upright. She had wrapped herself in the wool blanket like a cloak, but he could see her bare feet still bleeding, still damaged from her desperate flight through mountain wilderness. The bowl of porridge sat empty on the table, scraped clean with the spoon, every drop of honey licked away. She turned when he entered, her dark eyes wide and wary, tracking his every movement with the hypervigilance of prey animals. That no predators exist. In daylight, with fire and morning sun providing clear illumination, Eli could see her properly for the first time. She was younger than he had guessed, mid-20s at most, high cheekbones, strong jaw, a face that would have been beautiful if not for the exhaustion and fear carved into every feature. Her hair, tangled and matted with dirt and pine needles, hung past her shoulders in waves that suggested it had once been carefully maintained. The injuries he had glimpsed the previous night were revealed in full daylight, purple and yellow spreading across her arms, deep blue on her left cheekbone, green shadows on her neck where someone had gripped her throat, evidence not of accident but of deliberate cruelty. "You did not need to stand," Eli said, setting the rabbits on the preparation table near the door. "You are hurt." "I needed to move." Her voice was stronger than last night, but still carried uncertainty. Staying in bed felt like waiting to die. Eli nodded. He understood that feeling. He had felt it himself after battles when lying still meant replaying failures in endless mental loops until the mind found reasons to give up entirely. "Can you make it back to the bed?" he asked. She tried, made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. Eli moved quickly, catching her before she hit the floor, but he held her carefully, his hands touching only her shoulders and upper arm. Nothing that could be misinterpreted, nothing that would make her fear she had traded one threat for another. "Easy," he said. "You pushed your body past its limits. It needs time to recover." She did not pull away immediately. For a moment she let herself be supported, let herself acknowledge that she could not do everything through sheer determination. The weight of her against his arm was slight. She had not eaten properly in days, maybe longer, and her body had burned through every reserve trying to keep her alive. He helped her back to the bed, and this time she did not protest. She sat on the edge, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, and watched him with those careful eyes that missed nothing. "The porridge was good," she said finally. "Thank you." "You are welcome." Silence settled between them, different from the night before. Less immediate panic, more tentative exploration of what came next. The silence of 2 people trying to figure out whether they could trust each other enough to move beyond the present moment. Eli moved to the stove and began preparing the rabbits for cooking. He had done this so many times the actions required no conscious thought. Skinning with quick, efficient cuts. Cleaning with practiced thoroughness. Sectioning meat into portions that would cook evenly. His hands worked while his mind processed the situation he had voluntarily entered by choosing not to turn her away. "Why do you live alone?" she asked suddenly. The question hung in the warm air like smoke. Eli's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work, but that moment was enough to reveal that the question had struck something he preferred to keep buried. "Because I do not deserve to live with anyone," he said finally. The words came out flat, matter of fact, not seeking sympathy or argument, just stating truth as he understood it. He expected her to probe deeper, to ask what he had done to deserve self-imposed isolation. Instead, she said something that stopped his hands completely. "I ran from people who think they own me. Maybe we are both prisoners in different ways." Eli turned to look at her, really look at her. And he saw it then beneath the fear and exhaustion, recognition, understanding. She knew what it meant to carry weight that could not be set down. She understood what it felt like to wake up every day and feel chains even when they were invisible. "What is your name?" he asked. "Naira." She pulled the blanket tighter. "It means big eyes in Shoshone." Shoshone, not Apache. He had been right about the lie, but he understood why she had told it. Fear made people reach for whatever protection they could find, even borrowed traditions from tribes not their own. "Elijah," he offered in return. "People call me Eli." "Do you have people, Eli?" "No, not anymore." "Neither do I." She looked down at her hands, which were shaking slightly in her lap. "The people who raised me were not family. They were jailers who called it love." Eli returned to preparing the rabbit, giving her space to continue or stop as she chose. The meat sizzled when he placed it in the hot iron pan. The smell began to fill the cabin, rich and promising, the smell of survival. "I was 12 when they took me in," Naira continued. Her voice had gone distant, like she was narrating events that happened to someone else. "Samuel Cutter. He said he was saving me after my parents died in the fever outbreak of '64. He said I would have a home education, a future. What he meant was that I would have a cage until I was old enough to be useful." Eli kept his hands busy with cooking, but every word registered. Samuel Cutter. The name meant wealth, power. The kind of man who appeared in newspapers and owned businesses and believed rules applied to other people. "His son Marcus," Naira's voice tightened. "He decided I belonged to him, not as a wife, as property, something he owned by right of his father having claimed me first. When I said no, when I fought back, they locked me in the storage house behind their main building. Marcus said he would teach me to be grateful for their generosity." The rabbit in the pan continued cooking, but Eli was no longer paying attention to it. His entire focus had narrowed to her words, to the story unfolding in quiet tones that barely contained rage and remembered terror. 3 days ago, he came to that room drunk, very drunk. He said he was tired of waiting. He tried to force me." Her hands clenched in the blanket. "I hit him with the oil lamp. The building caught fire. I ran while everyone was trying to put it out. I ran for 2 days, maybe 3. I lost track of time. I followed the cold because I thought they would expect me to go toward warmth. When I saw your cabin lights last night, I did not know if you would help or hurt me. I just knew I could not run anymore." Eli turned the rabbit carefully, then looked at her directly. "They will come looking. I know. They will bring money, maybe law. They will claim you are legally bound to them somehow. Adoption papers, guardianship documents. Something that makes you their responsibility. I know that too. And you still came here to a stranger." Naira met his eyes, and for the first time since he had found her in his bed, he saw something besides fear dominating her expression. He saw determination that went bone deep. "I came here because dying free seemed better than living as someone's possession. If you want me to leave, I will leave, but I will not go back to them. I would rather freeze in these mountains than let Marcus Cutter touch me again." The conviction in her voice reminded Eli of soldiers he had served with, the ones who understood that some things were worse than death, the ones who would rather die fighting than surrender to tyranny. He had always respected that quality, even when it got people killed. "You can stay," he said. The words emerged before he had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he recognized their rightness. "Until you are healed, until we figure out what comes next." "Why?" The question was not suspicious, just honestly confused. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Eli considered his answer carefully. He could tell her about the guilt he carried, about the 23 people who died because he had followed bad intelligence and worse orders, about how every day since then had been an exercise in punishing himself for surviving when innocence had not, about how he had built this isolated existence specifically to ensure he never had the power to cause that kind of harm again. But instead he simply said, "Because your eyes do not lie." Something shifted in Naira's expression. Not quite trust, not yet, but the beginning of possibility, the tentative recognition that maybe in this isolated cabin in the middle of wilderness, she had found someone who saw her as a person rather than property. Eli finished cooking the rabbit and served it with the last of yesterday's bread, hard and stale, but still edible when warmed. They ate in silence. That was not uncomfortable, the kind of quiet shared by people who had each survived their own private wars and understood that sometimes silence communicated more than words. After the meal, Naira tried to help clean up, but her feet were too damaged. Eli noticed her wince with every step, saw her bite her lip against pain she was trying to hide. "Sit," he said, more command than request. "Your feet need care." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her face. The stubborn determination to prove she was not helpless, not weak, not a burden. But pain won over pride, and she returned to the bed, lowering herself carefully onto the edge. Eli brought water warmed on the stove, clean cloths torn from an old shirt, and the jar of salve Sarah Redbird had given him for treating injuries. He knelt in front of Naira, and when she instinctively pulled her feet back, he stopped. "I need to clean the cuts," he said. "Otherwise they will become infected. In this cold, infection can kill." She hesitated, then slowly extended her feet. They were worse than he had thought. Deep cuts from rocks and branches, blisters that had burst and bled, torn skin at the heels where she had run until flesh separated from bone. She had destroyed her feet running for her life, and the fact that she had made it this far was testament to willpower more than physical strength. Eli cleaned each wound with gentle efficiency, washing away dirt and dried blood, applying salve to injuries that made him wonder how she had managed to walk at all. She did not make a sound during the entire process, though he saw her hands grip the blanket tightly enough that her knuckles turned white. When he finished, he wrapped her feet in clean cloth and sat back on his heels. "You should stay off them for at least 3 days, maybe longer. I cannot stay in bed for 3 days. "You can and you will, unless you want to lose toes to infection." They stared at each other, two stubborn people who had each learned survival through refusing to quit. Finally, Naira nodded. 3 days, she agreed. "Then I help." "Then you help," Eli confirmed. He washed the dishes in melted snow water while Naira settled back against the pillow, exhaustion winning another round against determination. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into genuine sleep, the kind that came when a body finally believed it was safe enough to fully rest. Eli moved through the afternoon, completing necessary tasks. He checked his weapons, cleaned the rifle, oiled the pistol he rarely used, sharpened his knife until it could split paper. He counted his ammunition, 30 rounds for the rifle, 20 for the pistol. Enough for a sustained defense if necessary, though he hoped it would not come to that. He also checked his supplies, flour enough for 2 weeks, dried beans, some salt pork, coffee for another 10 days. Not generous, but sufficient if he hunted regularly. 2 people could survive on what he had if they were careful. As afternoon faded toward evening, Eli stepped outside to check the perimeter. Fresh snow had covered the tracks from the previous night, which was both good and bad. Good because it meant anyone searching for Naira would find no trail. Bad because it meant he could not see if anyone had passed nearby during the day. He walked a wide circle around the cabin, reading the forest for signs of intrusion. Nothing. No tracks except deer and rabbit. No broken branches at human height. No scent of tobacco or horse. They were alone for now, but as he completed the circle and prepared to return inside, something caught his attention. A single set of boot prints, partially filled with new snow, but still visible, leading from the south and stopping at a spot roughly 200 yards from the cabin. A spot that offered a clear view of his window. Someone had stood there, recently, watching. Eli's blood went cold. He knelt to examine the prints more closely. Large, male, heavy, suggesting the person had stood in that spot for some time, and the tread pattern showed metal studs, the kind mercenaries and hired guns preferred because they lasted longer than regular boot leather. Lucas, or someone like him. A tracker sent ahead to confirm location before the main force arrived. Eli stood slowly scanning the tree line with new urgency. The forest stared back silent and revealing nothing, but he knew what those tracks meant. They knew where Naira was. They knew she was not alone. They were watching, waiting, planning their approach. He returned to the cabin, quickly barred the door, and checked the window shutters. Naira still slept, unaware that their refuge had been compromised. Eli did not wake her. She needed rest more than she needed fear. But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped again, Eli sat in his chair with the rifle across his lap and accepted that the choice had been made. Not by him. By whoever had stood in those trees watching his cabin. By Samuel and Marcus Cutter, who believed they owned a woman and had the resources to take her back. They would come. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. And when they came, they would find that Elijah Carson, who had spent 4 years trying to atone for past failures through isolation and self-punishment, was still capable of being exactly what he had once been. A soldier, a scout, a man who knew how to read terrain and plan defenses and make hard choices when survival demanded them. The fire burned low. Outside wind began to rise, carrying with it the promise of another storm. And in that small cabin, as Naira slept and Eli kept watch, the fragile peace they had found began its inevitable transformation into something that would require both of them to become more than what they had been. The night deepened, the wind grew stronger, and somewhere out in the darkness, men were planning how to take back what they believed was theirs. But those men did not know, could not know, that the man they would face was already preparing for war. The morning of December 17th arrived with the particular stillness that preceded major storms in the Sierra Nevada. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that had not yet decided to fall. Temperature had dropped another 5 degrees overnight, and ice formed thick patterns on the cabin windows, fracturing morning light into geometric shards. Eli had not slept. He had spent the night alternating between watching Naira sleep and watching the forest beyond his windows for movement that never came. The tracks he had found haunted him. Someone knew. Someone was watching. The question was not if they would come, but when and in what numbers. At dawn he made his decision. They could not stay here. The cabin was defensible for perhaps a day against determined assault, but ultimately it was a trap. 1 door, 2 windows, no back exit, no way to retreat if overrun. They needed allies. They needed people who could provide shelter weapons and, most importantly, legitimacy in the eyes of law that Samuel Cutter would undoubtedly try to manipulate. Naira woke when he started moving with purpose rather than quiet maintenance. Her eyes opened, tracked him as he gathered supplies into leather bags, sorted ammunition, checked weapon function with the kind of focused intensity that communicated urgency without panic. "What happened?" she asked, sitting up slowly. "Tracks," Eli said, not seeing value in softening truth. 200 yards south. Someone watched this cabin yesterday. Heavy boots with metal studs, professional tracker probably. Her face went pale, but she did not collapse into fear. Instead, she threw back the blankets and tried to stand. Eli moved quickly, catching her before her damaged feet touched the floor. "You cannot walk yet," he said. "Then I will crawl. We need to move." "We do, but not the way you think." He helped her sit back down. "There is someone who can help us. A woman named Sarah Redbird. She runs a trading post in Markleyville, about 4 hours' ride from here. She has connections, resources, and she does not ask questions that she does not need answers to." 4 hours on horseback, Naira said, looking at her bandaged feet. "I will slow you down. You will ride with me. We can manage." "And if they find us on the trail?" Eli met her eyes directly. "Then they find us prepared instead of trapped." He gave her time to dress, turning his back while she struggled into the spare clothes he had laid out. wool pants that had belonged to him years ago before age and hard living had changed his frame, a thick shirt, a coat lined with rabbit fur, everything too large but everything warm. While she dressed, Eli packed with military precision, food for 3 days, water, ammunition, medical supplies, flint and steel, everything they would need to survive if the cabin became inaccessible. He left nothing that would tell watchers where they had gone or what they planned. When Naira was ready, Eli carried her outside to where he had prepared his horse. The animal stood patient and steady, already saddled with blankets arranged to provide cushioning for 2 riders. He lifted Naira into position, noting how light she was, how little she weighed despite her height and frame. Starvation had carved her down to essentials. "Hold tight," he said, mounting behind her. His arms came around her sides to grip the reins, creating a cage that would keep her secure without being threatening. She tensed initially, then forced herself to relax against him. Trust in action, even when fear screamed otherwise. They left the cabin as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Eli took them north first, away from Markleyville, riding through a creek bed for half a mile to break any trail. Then he turned west, using terrain he knew intimately, paths that avoided open spaces where they could be seen from distance. The cold bit through their layers. Naira shivered constantly despite the heavy coat, her body still recovering from exposure and exhaustion. Eli urged the horse faster, knowing speed mattered more than comfort now. They rode in silence for the first hour. The forest passed in patterns of white and dark green. Snow clung to everything, muffling sound, creating a world that felt both beautiful and hostile. Twice, Eli stopped to listen, scanning their back trail for signs of pursuit. Nothing. Either they had left before watchers arrived, or the watchers were content to follow at distance. "This woman," Naira said, as they crossed a frozen meadow, "Sarah Redbird. Why will she help us?" "Because 3 years ago she and I killed a grizzly together," Eli answered. "She had been hunting deer when she encountered a sow with cubs. The sow charged. Sarah got off one shot that wounded but did not kill. I heard the commotion and arrived in time to finish it. She would have died without help. And you think she will risk herself for us because of one debt? No, I think she will help because Sarah Redbird does not believe women are property, and she has resources we need." Naira absorbed this quietly. Then, "You have not asked me what I plan to do. After we deal with the cutters." "Yes." Eli guided the horse around a fallen tree, considering his answer. "That is your decision, not mine. I can help you survive the immediate threat. What you do with survival after that is yours to choose. Most men would have expectations. I am not most men." Another silence. Then Naira said something that surprised him. "My grandmother was at Modoc County." Eli's hands tightened on the reins involuntarily. The horse sensed tension and slowed. He forced himself to relax his grip. "I know," he said quietly. "I guessed from your age and tribe. You led the soldiers there." "Yes." "Tell me what happened, the truth." Eli had spent 4 years avoiding this conversation, 4 years building walls specifically to never have to articulate what he had done. But Naira deserved truth, especially given that her survival now depended on trusting him. "We were hunting Modoc warriors who had attacked a settlement." He began, the words coming with difficulty. "Killed 3 families, burned their homes. The territorial commander, Colonel Hastings, wanted revenge. He wanted blood. I was the scout. My job was to find them." The trail narrowed, and Eli had to focus on guiding the horse through tight spaces between pines. But the story continued. The intelligence was bad, deliberately so. I realized later, Hastings hated all indigenous peoples, did not distinguish between hostile warriors and peaceful families. When I found tracks leading to a winter camp, I reported them as probable hostiles. I was wrong. You did not know. I should have known. There were signs, children's footprints, patterns that suggested permanent settlement rather than warrior camp. But I was young, 29, eager to prove myself. I trusted the colonel's assurance that any indigenous camp in that region was hostile. They emerged from the trees into another open space. Eli scanned automatically for threats before continuing. By the time we arrived at the camp, I had started to doubt. The setup was wrong. Families, elders, only 2 men of fighting age, and they were armed with hunting weapons, not war weapons. I tried to stop it, argued with Hastings. He threatened to have me arrested for insubordination if I did not do my job. What was your job? Translator. He wanted me to tell them to surrender, but when I started explaining they were under military protection, if they complied, Hastings gave the order to fire. 23 people died in less than 5 minutes. Men, women, children. Your grandmother. I could not stop it once it started. Naira was silent for a long time. The horse plodded forward, breath steaming in cold air. Finally she spoke. My grandmother's name was Little Dove. She was 52 years old. She was teaching my mother traditional medicine when soldiers came. My mother survived because she ran to get water from the stream. She hid in the rocks and watched her mother die. Eli felt each word like a physical blow. I am sorry. The words are inadequate, but they are true. I am sorry. My mother died 6 years later from grief and whiskey. My father tried to raise me alone, but he was killed by settlers who wanted his land. Samuel Cutter appeared at the funeral and offered to take me in. He said he was a Christian doing God's work. I was 12 and alone and believed him. The connection between her tragedies and his guilt twisted in Eli's chest. He had helped create the circumstances that led to her current situation. His failure 4 years ago had rippled forward, destroying lives in ways he could never have predicted. I cannot undo what I did, he said. I cannot bring your grandmother back. I cannot restore your parents. But I can make sure that what Samuel and Marcus Cutter want to do to you does not happen. That is something I can do. Why? Because you feel guilty. Yes, and because it is right. They crested a ridge, and Markleyville came into view below, a small town barely worthy of the name. 20 buildings clustered around a main street. Trading post, saloon, boarding house, blacksmith. The kind of frontier settlement that served scattered ranchers and miners and trappers who needed civilization in measured doses. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved between buildings, small figures at this distance, normal life continuing, unaware that 2 people carrying dangerous histories were about to arrive asking for help. Sarah's place is the large building on the north end, Eli said, pointing, the one with the green door. As they descended toward town, Naira tensed. What if someone recognizes me? What if Cutter has sent word ahead? Markleyville is 3 days from Virginia City by fast horse, 5 days by normal travel. If they sent word immediately after you escaped, it might have arrived yesterday. But Sarah will know. She hears everything that matters in these mountains. They entered town from the east, avoiding the main street. People glanced at them, but without particular interest. A man and woman riding double was unusual, but not remarkable. Married couple probably, or siblings. No one looked closely enough to see bandaged feet or exhausted features. Sarah Redbird's trading post stood solid and weathered, built from local timber and river stone. The green door, freshly painted despite winter conditions, was distinctive by design. Sarah believed in being found by those who needed finding. Eli dismounted and lifted Naira down carefully, supporting her weight when her feet touched ground, and pain made her gasp. He half-carried her to the door and pushed it open without knocking. Inside, warmth and the smell of coffee, tobacco, and leather goods. The trading post was well-stocked, walls lined with everything from ammunition to fabric to cooking pots. A wood stove dominated the center, radiating heat. Behind the counter, a woman looked up from account books. Sarah Redbird was 43 years old, but looked younger, with the kind of face that aged slowly due to good health and better humor. Shoshone heritage showed in her features, but she dressed in frontier practical style. Wool skirt, cotton shirt, leather vest. Her hair, still fully black, was pulled back in a single braid. Her eyes, dark and sharp, assessed the situation in seconds. Elijah Carson, she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had learned English as a second language. You look like trouble has found you. Trouble found her, Eli said, helping Naira to a chair near the stove. I am just trying to make sure it does not take her. Sarah came around the counter studying Naira with eyes that missed nothing. The bruises, the bandaged feet, the way she held herself with rigid control despite obvious pain, the too large clothes, the exhaustion. Cutter's girl, Sarah said. It was not a question. Naira's head snapped up. You know, message came yesterday. Samuel Cutter offering $500 for information leading to recovery of his ward, Naira Whitehawk. Described as Shoshone, age 24, believed to have fled north after destroying property and assaulting his son, Marcus. Sarah's expression made clear what she thought of that description. Half the bounty hunters in Nevada Territory are probably heading this direction. Will you tell them? Naira asked quietly. Sarah looked at her for a long moment. Then she walked to the door, locked it, and flipped the sign from open to closed. No, she said simply. Because I know the Cutters. Samuel bought supplies here 3 years ago. Treated me like I was less than human because of my heritage. His son was worse. Looked at my niece like she was something he could purchase along with flour and ammunition. Men like that do not get my help recovering anything, especially not young women. Naira's shoulders dropped with relief so profound she swayed in the chair. Eli steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. We need help, Eli said. Not just shelter. Cutter will come with law on his side. Adoption papers, guardianship documents, maybe even marriage contracts claiming she is legally bound to Marcus. We need something that counters legal claims. Sarah poured coffee into tin cups and brought them over. You need Chief Winnemucca. Eli had expected this answer, but hearing it spoken aloud made his stomach tighten. He will kill me on sight. Probably, Sarah agreed, unless someone he respects speaks for you first, and unless you have something valuable to offer in return for help. What could I possibly offer that would make a Paiute chief forgive me for leading soldiers to massacre his people? Sarah sat down in the third chair, cradling her own coffee. Protection for one of his own. Naira is Shoshone, but her grandmother was Paiute. That makes her blood. If the chief declares her under tribal protection, no legal document from Nevada Territory can override that without causing political problems that Samuel Cutter cannot afford. Where is Winnemucca now? Eli asked. Secret Valley, 20 miles northeast. He lives there with 47 survivors from the Modoc County massacre. They do not welcome outsiders, especially white men who were at Modoc County. Then how do I approach without being shot? You do not. Sarah looked at Naira. She does. She asks for sanctuary. You are simply the man who brought her safely. If she speaks for you, if she claims you as protector rather than threat, the chief might listen before killing you. Naira set down her coffee cup. And if he does not listen, then Eli dies and you receive protection anyway. From your perspective, that is still better than going back to the Cutters. The brutal calculus of survival laid bare. Eli appreciated Sarah's directness, even as he felt the weight of probable death settling on his shoulders. I will go, Naira said, and I will speak for him. Why? Sarah asked. He led soldiers to kill your grandmother. You owe him nothing. Because he is trying to make things right. Because he did not touch me when I was helpless. Because he is willing to die to protect me from men who think they own me. Naira looked at Eli. That is worth speaking for. Sarah studied them both, then nodded. You will need supplies, food, warm clothes that actually fit her, medicine for her feet, and weapons. I can pay, Eli said. You can help me inventory the back room while your woman rests, Sarah countered. Call it payment. For the next 3 hours, while Naira slept on a cot in Sarah's private quarters, Eli worked. He moved crates, counted stock, repaired broken shelves, and split firewood. Physical labor that gave him time to think about what lay ahead. Chief Winnemucca, the man whose community Eli had helped shatter in a single morning of violence. The thought of facing him made something cold settle in Eli's chest. Not fear exactly, more like certainty. He had known for 4 years that someday his past would demand payment. He had not expected payment to come in the form of protecting someone connected to that very past, but perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps that was justice. When the work was complete, Sarah fed him stew and bread while updating him on everything she had heard about the Cutter's search. 4 men left Virginia City 2 days ago, she reported. Professional trackers and hired guns. Marcus Cutter is leading them personally. They are following a systematic grid pattern, checking every isolated cabin and settlement. They have legal authority from the territorial governor, or at least papers that look legal. Local law cannot interfere. How long before they reach here? 2 days, maybe 3 if the storm hits hard tonight. And how long to reach Secret Valley? In good weather, 1 full day. In storm, 2 days and high chance of death from exposure. Eli absorbed this. They were running out of time. If they left now, they might reach Winnemucca before Cutter's men arrived in Markleyville. Might convince the chief to provide protection before legal documents became military enforcement, or they might die in the mountains and solve everyone's problems through freezing. "There is something else you should know," Sarah said quietly. Marcus Cutter is not just angry about losing Naira. He is humiliated. His father built an empire by appearing strong and in control. Marcus failing to control one woman makes him look weak. He will not accept that. He will want to make an example. Not just recover her, but punish her publicly, so everyone knows what happens to women who defy Cutter authority. What kind of punishment? The kind that destroys a woman, even if it does not kill her. Eli's hands clenched around his coffee cup. The old rage stirred the kind that had made him a dangerous soldier before it made him a guilty one. "That will not happen," he said. "Can you promise that against 4 professional guns and legal authority and all of Samuel Cutter's money, I can try. That is all any man can do." Sarah reached across the table and gripped his wrist. Trying got 23 people killed at Modoc County. This time make sure trying is enough. The words hit hard because they were true. Trying was not enough when lives depended on success. He needed to be better than trying. He needed to be certain. But certainty was a luxury he could not afford. They left Markleyville at dusk, when failing light would hide their departure from casual observers. Sarah had provided everything they needed: food enough for 5 days, proper cold weather gear that actually fit Naira, medicine for infections, ammunition for weapons, and something more valuable than any physical goods, detailed information about approaching Secret Valley without being killed immediately. "The entrance is marked by 3 white stones stacked in a cairn," Sarah had explained, drawing a rough map. "Approach from the east, not the west. Western approach makes sentries think you are trying to hide. Eastern approach shows you know the proper path. Wait at the cairn. Do not proceed further. They will come to you." "And if they come with weapons ready to fire," Eli had asked, "then you make sure Naira is in front and you are clearly unarmed. If they see her heritage, see her injuries, see you protecting rather than threatening you, might live long enough to speak." Now, as they rode through forest already darkening under gathering storm clouds, Eli reviewed every detail of Sarah's instructions. His life might depend on performing those details perfectly, and, more importantly, Naira's freedom might depend on it. She rode in front of him again, warmer now, in proper clothes, but still weak from days of poor eating and hard travel. She had not complained once, though he felt her wince every time the horse's gait jarred her damaged feet. "Tell me about the chief," she said as they crossed a frozen stream. "What kind of man is he?" "I only saw him once during the massacre. He was younger then, maybe 55. He tried to stop the fighting by stepping between his people and the soldiers. Colonel Hastings shot him in the face. The bullet took his left eye but somehow did not kill him. He stood there, blood pouring down, and said something in Paiute. I did not understand the words, but I understood the meaning. He was cursing us, cursing me. And you think he will help us? No, I think he will help you. I think he will tolerate my presence long enough for you to ask for protection. What happens to me after that is irrelevant as long as you are safe. Naira twisted in the saddle to look back at him. It is not irrelevant to me. Why, I am the man who helped kill your grandmother. You are also the man who is sacrificing everything to save me. People are complicated, Eli. They can be guilty and still worthy of forgiveness. He had no answer for that, so he focused on guiding the horse through increasingly difficult terrain. The trail to Secret Valley was barely a trail at all, more a suggestion of passage through wilderness that actively resisted human presence. Snow deepened as they climbed higher into the mountains. Wind picked up, carrying the smell of more snow coming. They made camp that night in a shallow cave Eli knew from previous explorations. It was barely deep enough for 2 people and 1 horse, but it blocked wind and kept snow off them. He built a small fire using dead wood that produced minimal smoke, and they ate dried meat and hard bread in silence, while wind howled outside. "What will you say to him?" Naira asked eventually. "To Chief Winnemucca. The truth. That I failed 4 years ago, that I cannot undo that failure, that I am trying to at least protect one person from suffering the way his people suffered. It will not be enough. Truth rarely is, but it is all I have." "You could lie. Make yourself sound better. He would know. Men who have survived what he survived develop sharp instincts for lies." They took turns sleeping when all was awake to maintain the fire and watch for threats. During Eli's watch, he studied Naira in firelight and wondered what would happen if they actually succeeded. If Chief Winnemucca granted protection, if Cutter's men were turned away, if she actually achieved the freedom she had destroyed her feet running toward, what would she do then? Where would she go? Back to Markleyville, perhaps to work with Sarah, or further to Oregon Territory, where Shoshone communities offered more acceptance. Or maybe south to California settlements that asked fewer questions about heritage. And what would he do? Return to his cabin and resume the isolated existence he had built as punishment. Somehow that felt impossible now. The 4 years of isolation had been broken, and he could not imagine simply returning to that silence after everything that had happened. But those were questions for after survival, and survival was not yet certain. Dawn came gray and cold, with snow falling in thick curtains that reduced visibility to mere yards. Eli considered waiting for better weather, but time was their enemy. Every hour delayed was an hour Cutter's men came closer. They rode through snow that quickly became a full storm. Wind drove ice crystals into exposed skin. The horse struggled through drifts that reached its knees. Visibility dropped until Eli navigated purely by compass, and memory-trusting terrain sense developed through years of scouting. Naira endured without complaint, though he felt her shivering constantly, despite layers of wool and fur. She was still too weak for this kind of exposure, still too damaged from her initial flight. But there was no choice except forward. By midday, the storm had become a blizzard. Eli could barely see the horse's head in front of him. The wind screamed through trees, tearing at their clothes, trying to rip away anything not secured. Temperature had dropped until breathing hurt, until exposed skin numbed in seconds. "We need shelter," Naira shouted over the wind. Eli knew she was right, but stopping meant delay, and delay meant death of a different kind. He pushed forward, navigating by feel, now more than sight-trusting instinct developed through a decade of surviving in harsh conditions. Then, through the driving snow, he saw them. 3 white stones stacked in a cairn exactly as Sarah had described, the entrance to Secret Valley. They had made it. Against weather that should have killed them, against odds that favored failure, they had reached the point where survival became possible. Eli dismounted, helped Naira down, and positioned her in front of him with his hands clearly visible and empty. The rifle remained secured to the horse. The pistol stayed in its holster. He made himself vulnerable in every way that mattered, showing through action that he came not as threat, but as supplicant. Then they waited. The storm raged around them. Snow accumulated on their shoulders, their heads, the patient horse. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Eli began to wonder if the sentries were even out in this weather, if perhaps they would freeze here, waiting for contact that would never come. Then figures materialized from the blizzard. 4 men, Paiute warriors dressed in layers that made them nearly invisible against snow and stone. They carried rifles, modern weapons aimed with the casual competence of people who knew how to use them. The lead warrior was younger than Eli had expected, late 20s perhaps, with a face marked by old scars and new anger. He looked at Eli with open hatred, then shifted his attention to Naira. His expression changed, hardening into something more complex than simple hostility. "You bring white man to our sanctuary," he said in English, accented but clear. "Give reason why we should not kill him now." Naira stepped forward, limping on her damaged feet, but holding herself straight. "My name is Naira Whitehawk. My grandmother was Little Dove of the Paiute people. She died at Modoc County. This man helped lead soldiers there. He carries that guilt every day. Now he protects me from white men who want to own me. I ask sanctuary under tribal law. I ask that he be allowed to speak before you judge him." The warrior studied her for a long moment. Then he looked past her to Eli. "I am Takota. My mother died at Modoc County. This man's face was the last thing she saw before soldiers killed her. Why should I let him live?" Eli met the young man's eyes directly. "You should not. I deserve your revenge. But she deserves your protection. If killing me achieves both, then do it after you promise her safety. If killing me prevents her safety, then wait." Takota's finger tightened on the rifle trigger. Eli watched it happen, watched the decision process play across the warrior's face. Revenge versus duty. Personal justice versus tribal responsibility. Finally, Takota lowered the rifle slightly. "Chief Winnemucca will decide. You will come with us. If you reach for weapon, you die. If you run, you die. If you speak without permission, you die. Understand? I understand." They were led into Secret Valley through passages that would have been invisible without guides. The storm continued, but within the valley's sheltering walls, wind reduced to manageable levels. Lodges appeared through snow, traditional Paiute structures, mixed with more permanent buildings. Smoke rose from fires. People moved between shelters, going about survival tasks despite brutal weather. Eli counted quickly. 47 people, Sarah had said. He saw perhaps 30 visible, which meant others were inside or elsewhere, mostly women and children. Only 8 or 9 men of fighting age. A community still recovering from devastation, still rebuilding from loss. They were taken to the largest lodge positioned at the valley center. Takota spoke briefly to someone inside, then gestured for Eli and Naira to enter, inside warmth and the smell of wood smoke and cooking meat. The lodge was well-maintained floor covered with woven mats, walls lined with supplies and weapons. At the center, beside a fire pit, sat an old man who radiated authority despite age and injury. Chief Winnemucca looked older than Eli remembered, 70, perhaps more. His hair was completely white now, worn long and unbound. The left side of his face was scarred heavily, the eye socket empty, covered with a leather patch. But his remaining eye was sharp and clear, and when it focused on Eli, recognition was immediate. "The scout," the chief said. His English was perfect, educated, the voice of a man who understood both worlds. The one who led them to us. Eli knelt, forehead touching the mat. Traditional supplication, acknowledgement of authority and acceptance of judgment. "Yes, Chief, I am that man. Why do you come here to gloat, to count how many of us survived your betrayal, to ask help for someone your people have a responsibility to protect?" The chief's eye shifted to Naira, who had knelt beside Eli. He studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened. "Stand, child. Let me see you properly." Naira stood, swaying slightly from exhaustion. The chief rose and approached her, moving with the careful deliberation of age and old injuries. He touched her face gently, turning it to catch firelight. He examined the bruises, the marks of violence. His jaw tightened. "Who did this? White men who claimed to own me, who said I was property because they took me in when my parents died, who wanted to use me for their profit and their pleasure. This man stopped them. This man protected me. This man brought me here so I could ask for help. He cannot provide alone." Chief Winnemucca looked at Eli, who remained kneeling. "You protected her." "I tried, Chief. Why, what is she to you? Someone who deserves better than what powerful men want to do to her. Someone whose grandmother died because I made a terrible mistake. I cannot bring Little Dove back, but I can try to save her granddaughter." The chief returned to his seat, moving slowly. The lodge had filled with others. Warriors, elders, women and children, all watching, all waiting to see what judgment would be pronounced. "Tell me what happened at Modoc County," the chief said. "All of it, every detail." So Eli told him. He described the bad intelligence, the corrupt colonel, his own failure to recognize warning signs, the moment when he realized the truth but could not stop the violence, the massacre that followed, mothers, elders, children, the guilt that followed. He told it clearly and completely, holding nothing back, offering no excuses. When he finished, silence filled the lodge. Finally, Chief Winnemucca spoke. "You were young, you were following orders, you tried to stop it when you understood. These things do not erase what was taken from us, but they make you different from the colonel who gave the orders. They make you someone who might be redeemed through right action. I do not seek redemption, Chief, only the chance to protect her. And if protection requires your life, then it requires my life." The chief studied him for another long moment. Then he looked at Naira. "What does your heart say about this man?" Naira did not hesitate. "My heart says he carries his sin every day, that he has isolated himself as punishment, that he does not seek forgiveness because he does not believe he deserves it. And my heart says he is the only man who has ever seen me as a person rather than property. That is worth protecting. He is worth protecting." Her words hung in the warm air. The chief closed his eye, and Eli saw him weighing lives and debts and possibilities. "I will grant sanctuary to Naira Whitehawk," the chief said finally. "She is blood. She is ours to protect. The white men who hunt her will be told she is under tribal protection. If they attempt to take her, they will face the consequences." Relief flooded through Eli so intensely his hands shook. "And you," the chief continued, looking at Eli, "you cannot undo death. You cannot restore what was taken. But you can honor the dead by protecting the living. I will not kill you today. Instead, I give you a task. Help us defend this place. Help us protect our children. And when this is over, teach our young people how to navigate the white man's world without losing themselves. Do this, and perhaps your guilt will weigh slightly less." Eli's throat tightened. He had expected death. He had prepared for it. But this was harder than death. This was the demand that he actually try to make amends. "I will do everything you ask, Chief. Then stand. You are a guest here, not prisoner. You will be fed. You will be given shelter. And tomorrow we will plan how to keep the white men from taking what they believe they own." As the gathering dispersed, Dakota approached Eli. The young warrior's face was still hard, still hostile, but something had shifted. "My mother's name was Bright Morning," he said. "When soldiers shot her, she was teaching my sister to weave baskets. My sister was 6. She saw everything." "I am sorry," Eli said, knowing the words were inadequate. "Sorry does not bring her back, but protecting Naira. That is something. That is action, not just words. So I will not kill you, but I will watch you. And if you fail her, if you prove unworthy of the chief's mercy, then I will finish what should have been finished 4 years ago." "I understand." "Good." Dakota's expression hardened further. "Because the white men coming are not like you. They do not carry guilt. They do not question orders. They will kill anyone who stands between them and what they want. Are you prepared for that kind of fight? Eli thought about the tracks outside his cabin, about Marcus Cutter's humiliation, about Sarah's warning that punishment would be worse than death. Yes, he said, I am prepared. That night, as wind howled through Secret Valley and snow continued to fall, Eli sat with Naira beside a fire in the lodge they had been given. She was warm, finally properly fed, finally safe, finally. The tension that had kept her upright for days was beginning to ease, allowing exhaustion to show. You did not have to speak for me, Eli said quietly. You could have let Dakota kill me and still received protection. I know. So why? Naira looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something that surprised him. Not gratitude, not obligation, something deeper. Because you are the first person in 12 years who has treated me like I have value beyond what I can provide for others. Because you have never touched me without permission. Because you were willing to die rather than send me back. Those things matter, Eli. They matter more than old guilt. He had no response to that. So instead he simply sat with her in warm silence, while outside in the darkness, beyond the fire's glow, men were coming who would test whether his willingness to die would be enough to keep her free. The storm broke on the morning of December 21st, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline perfection. Every branch carried a burden of fresh snow. Every rock wore a cap of white. The sun rose into a sky so clear and blue it hurt to look at directly, and the temperature dropped further, settling into the kind of cold that froze breath before it could dissipate. Eli stood at the edge of Secret Valley watching the eastern trail with the focus of a man who understood that beauty and danger often arrive together. Beside him, Dakota crouched low, reading tracks in the fresh snow with practiced expertise. 4 riders, Dakota said quietly. Heavy horses. They stopped here 3 hours ago, studied the approach, then turned back. Scouting, Eli confirmed. Checking defenses before committing to assault. They will not attack here. Too narrow. Too easy to defend. They will wait for us to leave, or they will try to draw us out. Eli nodded. He had reached the same conclusion during the night while planning with Chief Winnemucca and the valley's defenders. Secret Valley was defensible, but also a trap. They could hold against assault for days, maybe weeks. But eventually supplies would run low, and Marcus Cutter had the resources to simply wait them out. No, the solution was not to hide and hope. The solution was to confront the threat in a place and time of their choosing with terms that favored defense over assault. They needed to turn the hunters into the hunted. Echo Summit, Eli said, naming the narrow pass that connected the high country to the lower valleys. It is the only practical route for heavy horses in winter. They will have to use it. And we will be waiting, Dakota finished. His hand moved to the rifle slung across his back, checking its readiness without conscious thought. They returned to the valley to finalize preparations. Chief Winnemucca had agreed to the plan despite risks. 4 Paiute warriors would join Eli in the ambush. Naira had demanded to participate, and after demonstrating her skill with a bow inherited from a father who had taught her before settlers killed him, the chief had reluctantly agreed. Sarah Redbird had arrived the previous evening, bringing Deputy Thomas Kane of Alpine County with her. Kane was 46 years old, weathered by frontier life, but carrying himself with the bearing of a man who believed in law even when law was manipulated by powerful men. He was one of the few lawmen in the territory who treated indigenous peoples as citizens rather than obstacles. I cannot stop Cutter legally, Kane had explained the night before, his voice carrying regret. He has papers from the territorial governor, adoption documents, guardianship claims. On paper everything looks legitimate, but I can observe, I can witness, and if he or his men break actual law, territorial documents will not protect them from consequences. It was a thin thread of hope, but it was something. If they could provoke Cutter into illegal action in front of a lawman, if they could make him reveal his true nature publicly, then legal protection might follow. Now, as the sun climbed toward noon, 8 people prepared for confrontation that would determine Naira's future and possibly end several lives. Eli checked his weapons with the thoroughness of long habit. Rifle loaded 16 rounds in reserve. Pistol cleaned and functional, 12 rounds available. Knife sharpened to an edge that could split paper. Every tool ready, every preparation complete. Naira approached as he finished. She wore traditional Paiute clothing now provided by the valley's women, buckskin dress layered under a heavy wool coat. Her feet, still healing but functional with proper wrapping, wore moccasins lined with rabbit fur. Her hair was braided in the style of Shoshone women, decorated with small beads that caught sunlight. She carried the bow Chief Winnemucca had given her, a weapon that had belonged to his wife before soldiers killed her. "You do not have to do this," Eli said, though he knew argument was futile. "You are safe here. Let us handle Cutter. He is coming for me. I will not hide while others risk themselves." She touched the bow reverently. "The chief said his wife killed 3 soldiers before they shot her. He said I carry her weapon now, and I should honor her memory with courage. Courage and foolishness sometimes look similar. Then we will be foolish together." They left Secret Valley in groups traveling separate paths to avoid presenting a single target. Eli and Dakota went first, moving fast through terrain they had scouted the previous day. Behind them, 2 more warriors followed erasing tracks as they went. Naira traveled with the final pair protected, but contributing to her own defense. Echo Summit was a natural fortress. The trail narrowed to barely 15 feet across, winding between rock walls that rose 40 feet on either side. Anyone passing through would be exposed, vulnerable, unable to maneuver. It was the kind of terrain military commanders dreamed about when planning defensive operations. Eli positioned his forces with tactical precision learned through years of military service. Dakota and 2 warriors took positions on the southern rim, concealed behind rocks and scrub pine, with clear fields of fire across the entire pass. Naira and 1 warrior positioned themselves on the northern rim, elevated enough to shoot down at targets below. Eli placed himself at the western end where the trail entered the pass, where he could see threats approaching and coordinate response. Deputy Kane and Sarah Redbird waited further back in positions where they could observe without being immediate targets. Kane needed to witness events clearly to provide legal testimony. Sarah was there as backup, carrying a rifle and the grim determination of someone who had survived grisly attacks and frontier hardships. Then they waited. The sun climbed higher. Temperature remained brutally cold despite bright light. Eli's breath formed clouds that he deliberately suppressed, breathing shallow and slow to avoid creating visible markers of his position. Around him, the others did the same. 7 people frozen in place, waiting for 4 riders who would determine whether a young woman lived free or returned to captivity. Time moved strangely during ambush. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound became magnified. The whisper of wind through rock, the distant call of a raven, the creak of leather and wood as someone shifted position, then voices carrying on cold air, male, confident, the sound of men who believed they hunted prey that could not fight back. Eli peered around the rock formation that concealed him. 4 riders approached from the east, moving with the casual arrogance of people who expected compliance. 3 were clearly hired guns, hard men with weapons displayed prominently, dressed in practical gear that prioritized function over appearance. They scanned surroundings with professional wariness, but not expecting immediate threat. The 4th rider was Marcus Cutter. Eli recognized him from Sarah's description. 31 years old, tall and broad through the shoulders, with the build of someone who maintained strength through regular training. He wore expensive clothing adapted for rough travel, wool coat with fur collar, leather gloves, boots that probably cost more than most frontier families earned in a month. His face carried the particular arrogance of men who had never experienced real consequences for their actions. They entered the pass with weapons ready but not aimed, alert but not alarmed. The lead hired gun studied the rock walls with professional assessment, recognizing the tactical disadvantage but clearly concluding that no one would be foolish enough to challenge a group carrying legal authority and superior firepower. He was about to learn how wrong that assessment was. Eli waited until all 4 riders were fully committed to the narrow passage too far in to retreat quickly, but not yet close enough to reach the western exit. Then he stood rifle leveled and spoke with the command voice he had not used in 4 years. "That is far enough." 4 heads snapped toward him, hands moved toward weapons. But before any guns could clear holsters, Dakota stepped into view on the southern rim, rifle aimed. Then the other 2 warriors appeared. Then Naira rose on the northern rim bow, drawn with arrow, knocked the string pulled back to her cheek with steady hands. The hired guns froze. Professional fighters knew when they had been outmaneuvered. They were in a kill box surrounded by elevated shooters with no cover and no good options. 1 might survive if shooting started, maybe 2, but all 4 impossible. Marcus Cutter, however, did not share his employees' tactical awareness. He spurred his horse forward, face reddening with rage. "You dare point weapons at me? I have legal authority from the territorial governor. That woman is my father's ward, legally bound to our family. You are committing crimes by harboring her." "That woman has a name," Eli said, not moving his rifle. "Naira Whitehawk, and she is not property regardless of what documents you bought." "Documents I bought," Marcus's voice rose. "Documents that prove she is ours, our responsibility, our right. She destroyed our property, assaulted me, fled without permission. She will return and face consequences, or you will all be arrested for kidnapping." From his concealed position, Deputy Kane stepped into view. His badge caught sunlight, unmistakable symbol of legal authority. "Thomas Kane, Deputy Sheriff of Alpine County," he announced. "I am here to witness these proceedings and ensure law is followed by all parties." Marcus turned to face him, and some of the rage transformed into calculation. "Deputy, good. You can assist in recovering my father's ward." "I can observe," Kane corrected. "If the young lady is being held against her will, I will intervene. But I see no evidence of that. I see a woman standing free-armed, making her own choices." "She is not capable of making choices. She is indigenous, a ward. She needs guidance." "She looks pretty capable to me," Kane said. "In fact, she looks like someone who knows exactly what she wants." On the northern rim, Naira lowered her bow slightly, but kept the arrow nocked. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the cold air. "I am Naira Whitehawk, daughter of Running Wolf and a Morning Star. I am Shoshone through my father Paiute, through my mother. I am not your ward. I was never yours. You stole me when I was too young to fight. You caged me. You tried to use me. I refuse. I will never return." "You do not have a choice," Marcus snarled. He reached into his coat and pulled out folded papers. "These documents say otherwise. Legal adoption, legal guardianship, signed by judges. You are ours until you marry, and you will marry me or face charges of arson and assault." "Show me those documents," Kane said, moving closer. Marcus handed them over, confidence returning. Whatever else was true, the papers were legal, properly signed, officially sealed. In frontier territory, where law often favored white property owners over indigenous peoples, documents like these carried weight. Kane studied them carefully, reading every word. His expression remained neutral, but Eli saw tension in his shoulders. The documents were legitimate, or legitimate enough that challenging them would require more authority than a county deputy possessed. "These appear to be in order," Kane said, finally reluctantly. "Miss Whitehawk, do you contest these documents?" "I contest that human beings can be owned," Naira said. "I contest that signatures on paper matter more than my will. I contest that Samuel Cutter's money can purchase me like livestock. In law, these documents do give the Cutter family authority over you until you reach age 25 or marry." "Then the law is wrong." Marcus smiled, ugly and triumphant. "The law is the law. Now come down here and we will return to Virginia City. The judge will decide your punishment for property destruction and assault. If you cooperate, perhaps he will be lenient. I would rather die. That can be arranged if you insist on being difficult. The threat hung in cold air. One of the hired guns shifted nervously, hand moving toward his weapon. He was reading the situation better than Marcus, understanding that threatening death in front of a lawman might be the mistake that changed everything. Eli caught the movement and spoke quickly. "Deputy Kane, you heard that threat. He just threatened to kill her if she does not comply. That is coercion. That is illegal regardless of what papers he holds." Kane nodded slowly. "I did hear it. Mr. Cutter, I am going to have to ask you to refrain from making threats. Guardianship does not include right to threaten death." "I was speaking figuratively," Marcus said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "Explaining consequences of continued defiance sounded like a threat to me." "Then you misunderstood. Look, we are wasting time. I have legal authority. She is coming with us. Anyone who interferes will be charged with obstruction and kidnapping." Dakota's voice came from the southern rim, cold and hard. "Try to take her. See what happens." Marcus looked up, really seeing the Paiute warriors for the first time. His face paled slightly. Whatever bravado he carried, it was based on assumption that indigenous peoples would not actually fight back, not against white men with legal documents and guns. "You are threatening us," he asked, voice rising. "You are threatening American citizens." "We are protecting our own," Dakota replied. "She is blood. She is ours. Your papers mean nothing to us." "Deputy, are you going to allow this armed savages threatening citizens?" Kane's expression hardened at the slur. "I see armed individuals defending someone who appears to be exercising free will. I also see you escalating a situation that could be resolved peacefully." "Peacefully? She belongs to my family. She belongs to herself." The words came from Eli, spoken quietly, but with absolute conviction. "Whatever documents you hold, whatever claims you make, she is a human being with the right to choose her own path. You can argue law all you want, but law that treats people as property is unjust law, and I will not honor it." Marcus turned his full attention to Eli for the first time, really studying him. "And who are you? Another savage sympathizer, another fool who thinks indigenous mongrels deserve the same rights as civilized people." The racial slurs hung in the air like poison. One of the hired guns actually winced, recognizing that his employer had just crossed a line that would make everything harder. Eli's finger tightened slightly on the rifle trigger, but he controlled the impulse toward violence. Shooting Marcus would solve nothing and prove everything the man believed about indigenous peoples and their allies. "I am someone who understands that human beings are not property," Eli said, "and I am someone who will stand between you and her for as long as necessary." "Then you will die with her." Marcus reached for his pistol. It was clumsy, driven by rage rather than tactical thinking, but it was fast enough. The weapon cleared his coat, rising toward Eli, finger moving to the trigger. Three things happened simultaneously. Dakota fired from the southern rim. The bullet struck Marcus's hand, shattering bone, and sending the pistol spinning away to land in snow 15 feet distant. One of the hired guns, the smart one who had been reading the situation correctly, dropped his rifle and raised his hands. "I want no part of this," he said loudly. "I was hired to track, not murder." The other two hired guns reached for their weapons. Naira's arrow took the closest one through the shoulder, punching through his heavy coat and penetrating deep enough to make his right arm useless. He screamed and fell from his horse, landing hard in snow that quickly reddened with blood. The second hired gun managed to get his rifle up and fired wildly toward the northern rim. The bullet ricocheted off rock, whining away into distance. Before he could work the bolt for another shot, Eli put a bullet through his thigh, dropping him from the saddle with a cry of pain. 5 seconds. That was how long the violence lasted. 5 seconds to transform a tense standoff into bloodshed and broken bones. Marcus clutched his shattered hand, blood streaming between his fingers. face white with shock and pain. The smart hired gun still sat his horse with hands raised. The other two lay in snow wounded, but alive no longer threats. Deputy Kane stepped forward, his own pistol drawn, now aimed at the smart hired gun, just in case. "That is enough," Kane said. His voice carried absolute authority. "Mr. Cutter, you are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon. Your men are under arrest as accomplices. Miss Whitehawk, you and your companions have acted in clear self-defense, witnessed by a lawful officer of Alpine County." "You cannot arrest me," Marcus gasped through pain. "I have authority. I have documents." "Your documents do not give you the right to draw a weapon and attempt murder. That is very clear law, Mr. Cutter. Now you are going to dismount slowly and allow me to bind that hand before you bleed to death. My father will destroy you. He will end your career. He will make sure you never work in any territory west of the Mississippi. Maybe, but right now you are bleeding in the snow, and I am the only thing standing between you and people who have every reason to let you bleed out. So I suggest you accept my help." The fight drained out of Marcus, replaced by the reality of pain and defeat. He dismounted awkwardly, cradling his ruined hand, and allowed Kane to bind it with strips torn from a bandana. Sarah emerged from her position, rifle ready, but pointed safely down. She moved to the two wounded men and began providing basic first aid. Both would survive, though one would never have full use of his shoulder again, and the other would walk with a limp. Dakota and the other warriors descended from their positions, weapons ready, surrounding the prisoners with professional efficiency. They had fought and won without killing, which was its own kind of victory. Naira climbed down from the northern rim with careful movements, her wounded feet making the descent difficult. When she reached the floor of the pass, she walked directly to where Marcus sat in the snow, his face gray with shock. "I am not yours," she said. "I was never yours, and now everyone knows what kind of man you are, the kind who tries to murder women who refuse him. Deputy Kane will testify. These men will testify. Your father's money cannot erase that." Marcus looked up at her with hatred so pure it was almost physical. "This is not over. You think you have won? My father will come with 50 men. He will burn your savage village. He will make sure you suffer in ways that make death seem merciful." "Then he will die trying," Dakota said. "Your time of easy victory is finished. Now you face people who fight back." Deputy Kane finished binding Marcus's hand and hauled him to his feet. "You are all coming with me to Markleyville. There will be a hearing, there will be testimony, and then you will likely transfer to the territorial prison while awaiting trial. Threatening to burn indigenous settlements is a crime, Mr. Cutter. Even your father's money has limits." The smart hired gun spoke up. "Deputy, I will testify. I will tell the judge everything I saw and heard. I did not sign up for murder. I did not sign up for attacking women. I was told this was a legal recovery of a runaway ward. Everything Mr. Cutter did today contradicts what we were told." "Shut up," Marcus snarled. "You work for my father. You say nothing. I work for myself, and I am done working for you." Kane nodded. "Your cooperation will be noted in my report. Now can someone help me get these wounded men mobile? We have a long ride back to town." The next 2 hours passed in organized chaos. The wounded men were stabilized enough for travel. Marcus was secured on his horse with his hands bound. The smart hired gun agreed to ride under his own power, understanding that cooperation meant reduced charges. Sarah retrieved horses that had bolted during the shooting. Dakota and his warriors collected weapons and ensured no evidence was lost. Throughout it all, Eli watched Naira. She stood apart from the activity bow still in her hand, looking at the scene they had created. When he approached, she did not turn. "You were right to shoot him," Eli said quietly. "He was going to kill me." "I know, but I have never shot a person before. Animals for food, yes, but never a human being. It felt different than I expected." "How did it feel?" "Necessary and terrible, both at once." Eli understood that completely. He had felt the same confusion after his first combat. The realization that necessary violence still carried weight, still marked you in ways that could not be erased. You saved my life, he said. That matters. You have been saving mine since I crawled into your bed. I owed you that much. You owe me nothing. You never did. She turned to face him then, and he saw tears tracking down her face despite her controlled expression. I owe you everything. You gave me a chance to be free. You risked your life so I could choose my own path. How do I repay that? By living the life you choose, by being free. That is repayment enough. They stood together in the cold while around them the aftermath of violence was organized and contained. When Deputy Kane announced they were ready to depart, Naira finally moved, but she reached out and squeezed Eli's hand once before letting go. This is not finished, she said. Samuel Cutter is still free. He has resources. He will not accept this defeat. Then we will face him when he comes. But today we won. That is enough for today. The procession left Echo Summit as afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Marcus Cutter, once powerful and certain, now rode with bound hands and shattered pride. His hired guns followed under guard. Deputy Kane led them all toward justice that would be imperfect but real. Eli and Naira rode together surrounded by Paiute warriors who had become allies, protected by the very people Eli had once helped harm. The irony was not lost on him, nor was the grace. Secret Valley welcomed them back as evening approached. Chief Winnemucca stood at the entrance, flanked by elders and children, waiting to hear the outcome. When Takota reported success when he described Naira's arrow and Marcus's arrest, and Deputy Kane's testimony, the old chief nodded with satisfaction. You have done well, he said, looking first at his warriors, then at Naira, and finally at Eli. All of you. You have shown that justice is possible even when law is corrupted. You have proven that courage matters more than documents. That night the valley celebrated, not with wild abandon, but with the quiet satisfaction of people who had survived another threat. Food was shared. Stories were told. Children played while adults watched with relief that this particular danger had passed. Eli sat with Naira beside one of the fires, exhausted but unable to sleep. The adrenaline of combat was fading, leaving behind the familiar hollow feeling that followed violence. What happens now? Naira asked. After the trial, after Marcus is sentenced, what do I do with freedom? Whatever you want. That is what freedom means. I have never had that before. Choice. Real choice. It is terrifying. Yes, freedom is always terrifying, but it is better than the alternative. She leaned against him, and he did not pull away. They sat like that while the fire burned low and stars emerged in crystal-clear sky. Two people who had found each other through circumstance and violence and were now navigating what came after survival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Samuel Cutter would not accept his son's defeat. Legal battles would follow. Questions about guardianship and indigenous sovereignty and territorial law would need answers. But tonight they had won a battle that mattered, and that was enough. Winter deepened as December faded into January of 1877. Snow fell almost daily, accumulating in drifts that made travel difficult and isolation nearly complete. But within Secret Valley, life continued with the steady rhythm of people who had survived worse and would survive this too. Marcus Cutter stood trial in Virginia City 3 weeks after the confrontation at Echo Summit. Deputy Kane testified. Sarah Redbird testified. The smart hired gun, whose name turned out to be William Patterson, testified in exchange for reduced charges. Their combined testimony painted a picture of attempted murder, coercion, and threats that even Samuel Cutter's expensive lawyers could not adequately refute. William Patterson, the hired gun who had testified against his former employer, received a suspended sentence in recognition of his cooperation. Judge Morrison made clear that while Patterson's initial involvement was criminal, his choice to speak truth in court demonstrated moral courage that the law should acknowledge. Patterson left Nevada Territory the day after sentencing, heading east toward Colorado, mining camps, where he said he hoped to find work that did not require pointing guns at innocent people. Eli never saw him again, but years later heard rumors of a mine foreman in Leadville who had once been a tracker and who was known for treating indigenous workers with unusual respect. A significant sentence that sent messages about territorial law and limits of wealthy men's impunity. Samuel Cutter, present in the courtroom, had aged visibly during the proceedings. The powerful businessman who had built an empire through ruthlessness and strategic cruelty now faced the reality that his son would spend a decade in prison. His carefully constructed public image of benevolent patriarch had been shattered by testimony about how he and Marcus had treated Naira. After the sentencing, Samuel approached Deputy Kane in the courthouse hallway. Eli was present, having traveled to Virginia City specifically to ensure justice was served. "This is not over," Samuel said, his voice low and controlled. "My son made mistakes. He will pay for them. But the girl is still legally my ward. The guardianship documents remain valid. When Marcus is released, we will pursue legal avenues to recover our property." "Miss Whitehawk is not property," Kane said. "And I suggest you accept that reality before you end up in prison beside your son. I have broken no laws. I have proper documentation. I will pursue this through legal channels, and I will win." Eli stepped forward, and something in his expression made Samuel take an involuntary step back. "You will lose because Naira has claimed protection under Paiute tribal sovereignty. Chief Winnemucca has formally adopted her as his granddaughter. That makes her a tribal member with full rights and protections. Your territorial guardianship documents have no authority over tribal citizens." Samuel's face reddened. "That is a legal fiction. Tribal adoption cannot override proper guardianship. Take it to federal court if you want, but I guarantee you will lose, and the process will cost you more than just money. It will cost you the last shreds of your reputation. Everyone now knows what you and your son tried to do. Push this further, and the story spreads wider." "Is that what you want?" Samuel stared at Eli for a long moment, and in that stare Eli saw the calculation of a businessman weighing costs versus benefits. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Tell the girl she has won, for now. But power and money do not disappear simply because one judge makes one ruling. Eventually, circumstances will change, and when they do, I will remember this conversation." He walked away, expensive boots clicking on courthouse floor, leaving behind threats that were vague enough to be legal, but specific enough to be concerning. Judge Morrison, who had been observing the exchange from his chamber's doorway, approached Eli and Kane. "Mr. Carson, deputy, a word, please." They followed him into his chambers, where he poured whiskey from a crystal decanter and offered glasses. Both men accepted. "That was well handled," Morrison said. "Samuel Cutter is a dangerous man when cornered. You gave him an exit that preserves his pride while protecting Miss Whitehawk. That was smart." "Will the tribal adoption hold legally?" Eli asked. "In my court, yes. In federal court, probably. The precedents are murky, but indigenous sovereignty has been gaining recognition. Combined with the testimony about how she was treated, no federal judge wants to be the one who rules that a young woman must return to people who tried to harm her." Morrison sipped his whiskey. "However, Mr. Carson, you should know that Samuel Cutter has resources beyond legal channels. He has connections to men who do not concern themselves with law. If he decides Miss Whitehawk represents an unacceptable loss of face, he may pursue extra-legal solutions." "You mean he might send more men to take her by force?" "I mean exactly that, and while I can rule from a bench, I cannot protect her in remote mountains." "I can," Eli said, "and I will." Morrison studied him. "You are the scout from Modoc County, are you not? The one who led soldiers to the wrong camp?" "I am." "Then perhaps this is your chance to balance those scales, not erase what happened, but balance them slightly." Eli finished his whiskey and stood. "That is what I am trying to do, Your Honor." "Then may you succeed, Mr. Carson, for all our sakes." They left Virginia City the following morning, carrying the official court documents that declared Marcus Cutter's sentence and affirmed Naira's legal status as a tribal citizen. The journey back to Secret Valley took 3 days through heavy snow, but when they arrived, the entire community gathered to hear the news. Chief Winnemucca read the documents carefully, then looked at Naira with something like pride in his weathered face. "You are free," he said, "in the eyes of their law and in the eyes of ours. You are Naira Whitehawk, Winnemucca granddaughter of Chief's carrier of two people's blood, and you belong to no one but yourself." Naira wept, then the kind of tears that come from relief so profound it breaks through every defense. She knelt before the chief, and he placed both hands on her head in blessing. "Rise, granddaughter, you do not kneel before family." That night the valley celebrated with greater joy than before. This was not just survival of a threat. This was victory recognized by the very legal system that had oppressed them. This was proof that sometimes justice actually prevailed. Eli stood apart from the celebration, watching Naira dance with the valley's women, watching her laugh for perhaps the first time since he had known her. She looked different now, lighter, unburdened, free. Dakota approached, carrying 2 cups of hot cider. He offered one to Eli. "You look sad," Dakota observed. "We won. She is safe. You should celebrate." "I am not sad, just thinking about what comes next." "What comes next is you return to your cabin and resume your lonely life." "Is that what you want?" Eli considered the question honestly. A month ago, the answer would have been automatic, yes. Solitude was his penance, his chosen punishment, his way of ensuring he never again had the power to harm innocents. But now, after everything that had happened, the thought of returning to that empty cabin to days of silence, broken only by survival tasks, felt less like penance and more like waste. "I do not know what I want," he admitted. "Then perhaps you should ask what she wants." "She is free now. She can go anywhere, do anything. Why would she want a man carrying as much guilt as I carry?" Dakota laughed, the sound surprising in its genuine warmth. "You are stupid for a smart man. She already chose you. Every day since she crawled into your bed, she has chosen you. The question is whether you will choose her back or whether you will hide behind guilt like a coward." The words stung because they were true. Eli had spent 4 years using guilt as armor, as excuse, as justification for avoiding life. But guilt was also a cage, and cages were exactly what they had just freed Naira from. "I am not worthy of her," Eli said. "Probably not. But worthiness is not something we possess. It is something we earn through action, through choice, through showing up every day and trying to be better than we were yesterday. You have been doing that for a month. Continue doing that, and perhaps worthiness will follow." Before Eli could respond, Naira appeared flushed from dancing, her eyes bright with joy that transformed her features into something radiant. "Eli," she said, slightly breathless, "come dance. The women are teaching me traditional dances. Come learn with me." "I do not dance." "Neither did I until tonight. Come." She took his hand and pulled him toward the fire, where others danced in patterns that had been passed down through generations. Eli went awkward and uncertain, but he went. And when the music started and Naira showed him the basic steps, he tried to follow. He was terrible at it, clumsy and off rhythm. But Naira laughed without mockery, and the others clapped encouragement, and slowly he began to understand something important. This was liberation made visible. Not perfection, not the erasure of past suffering, but something more powerful, the right to choose joy in the present moment, to dance poorly and laugh freely, to claim happiness despite all that had tried to destroy it. Freedom wore no crown. It simply moved, breathed, lived. They danced until the fire burned low, and exhaustion claimed even the most energetic celebrants. Then they walked together toward the lodge they had been sharing along with 3 other families in the communal style common to the valley. Outside, under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Naira stopped. "What will you do now?" she asked. After tonight, after the danger has passed, will you return to your cabin? I was planning to, Eli admitted, but I have been reconsidering that plan. Why? Because returning to isolation feels like abandoning the person I am becoming, the person who helps instead of hiding, the person who fights for what is right instead of surrendering to guilt. Naira moved closer, and in the starlight, her face was serious. Chief Winnemucca asked me what I wanted to do with my freedom. He said I could stay here, learn traditional ways, become fully part of the tribe. Or I could go to Markleyville, work with Sarah, learn the trading business. Or I could go anywhere else in the territory, make any life I could imagine. What did you tell him? I told him I wanted to think about it, but the truth is, I already know what I want. She reached up and touched his face, her hand warm against his cold, reddened cheek. I want to be with the man who saved me, the man who protected me without owning me, the man who gave me the greatest gift anyone ever gave me, choice. If you return to your cabin, I want to go with you, not as someone you rescued, not as someone you feel obligated to protect, but as a partner, as someone who chooses to build a life with you. Eli's throat tightened. You deserve better than a guilty man in an isolated cabin. What I deserve is what I choose, and I choose you, but only if you choose me back, only if you can accept that loving someone is not the same as owning them, only if you understand that I am offering partnership, not surrender. The weight of the moment pressed down on Eli. This was a decision that would define the rest of his life. He could refuse, claim unworthiness, return to his cabin alone, and resume the self-imposed penance he had been serving for 4 years, safe, controlled, unchanging. Or he could accept what she was offering, a future that included joy and partnership and the possibility that redemption came not through isolation but through connection. Risky, unpredictable, alive. I choose you, he said, the words emerging hoarse but certain. I choose partnership. I choose to build something new instead of hiding from the past. I choose life instead of penance. Naira smiled, and even in starlight that smile was brilliant. Then we will build something together. We will expand your cabin into a real home. We will help Sarah with the trading post. We will teach the valley's children about the white man's world so they can navigate it without losing themselves. We will create a life that honors both our pasts and builds toward a future worth living. That sounds like hard work. Everything worth doing is hard work, but it is easier when you do not do it alone. They kissed. Then, tentative and gentle, a first kiss that carried the weight of everything they had survived and everything they hoped to build. When they pulled apart, Eli felt something loosen in his chest, some burden he had carried so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. Not all of it. The guilt would remain, would always remain, because 23 people were still dead, and nothing could change that. But alongside the guilt now was something else: purpose, hope, the possibility that a life could be more than punishment. They went inside to sleep, but not to their separate areas. They lay together on the same bedroll, fully clothed, holding each other for warmth and comfort and connection. And for the first time in years, Eli slept without nightmares. 3 months later, in March, when snow began to melt and the first green appeared on lower slopes, they held a ceremony. Chief Winnemucca presided, speaking in Paiute and English, joining them in marriage according to tribal tradition. Sarah Redbird and Deputy Kane attended as witnesses. Dakota stood as Eli's friend, speaking on his behalf, acknowledging his past while affirming his growth. The ceremony was simple: exchange of gifts, words of commitment, blessings from elders, recognition by community. When it concluded, Eli and Naira were married in the eyes of Paiute law, Shoshone custom, and their own hearts. They built their life slowly, carefully, with attention to the reality that healing took time and commitment was tested through daily choices rather than grand gestures. The cabin expanded. Eli and Dakota built an additional room for storage and workspace. They added a covered porch that provided shelter from weather. They improved the water system and expanded the garden space for spring planting. The isolated refuge became a home. Naira divided her time between the cabin and Secret Valley, learning traditional ways from the elder women while teaching younger ones how to read and write English, understanding that knowledge was protection in a world that often treated indigenous peoples as less than human. Eli worked with Chief Winnemucca to establish formal communication with territorial authorities, creating bridges between the valley and legal systems that could protect or destroy depending on how they were navigated. He taught young warriors how to track, hunt, and defend without becoming the kind of fighters who killed unnecessarily. He became what he had failed to be at Modoc County, a bridge between worlds rather than a weapon of one world against another. Sarah Redbird expanded her trading post to include indigenous crafts, creating economic opportunities for valley residents while building goodwill among white settlers who appreciated quality goods and fair prices. She became the informal ambassador between communities, smoothing tensions before they became conflicts. Deputy Kane continued his work, but with new awareness that law and justice were not always the same thing. He prosecuted crimes fairly, while recognizing that some laws were unjust and some justice existed outside legal frameworks. Samuel Cutter disappeared from public life after his son's imprisonment. Within 6 months, the Virginia City Tribune reported that the once powerful businessman had suffered a severe stroke, leaving him unable to speak or walk. His business empire, built on ruthlessness and strategic cruelty, crumbled without his iron grip. Partners who had feared him now abandoned him. Debts he had hidden behind displays of wealth came due. In March of 1879, 2 years after Marcus's conviction, word reached Secret Valley that Samuel Cutter had died alone in his mansion, attended only by a single servant who stayed for wages long overdue. His fortune, once estimated at over $200,000, proved largely fictional. Debts and bad investments had consumed most of it. The estate sale barely covered what he owed. Marcus remained in territorial prison with 6 more years to serve. The Cutter name, which had once opened doors and commanded respect throughout Nevada territory, became synonymous with the hubris of men who mistook wealth for righteousness and control for strength. Their legacy was not empire, but cautionary tale. Life continued. Seasons changed. Winter became spring, became summer. In August, Naira discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified them both for different reasons. Eli feared he would be a terrible father, that his guilt and past would poison any child they raised. Naira feared pregnancy itself, having watched her mother die in childbirth years ago, having heard too many stories of women who did not survive creating life. But Chief Winnemucca blessed the pregnancy in traditional ceremony, and the valley's women surrounded Naira with knowledge and support, and slowly fear transformed into cautious hope. The baby was born in March of 1878, delivered by tribal midwives with ancient knowledge, with Eli present, despite tradition suggesting fathers should wait outside. The labor was long and difficult, but ultimately successful. A girl, healthy, loud, perfect. They named her Little Dove after Naira's grandmother, honoring the woman whose death had led indirectly to their meeting. And when Eli held his daughter for the first time, feeling her tiny weight against his chest, he understood something profound. This was not redemption. 23 people were still dead. Nothing could change that. No amount of good action could erase bad consequences. But this was continuation. This was life asserting itself despite tragedy. This was proof that after destruction, creation remained possible. That after failure, success could be built. That after guilt, purpose could emerge. He looked at Naira, exhausted but alive, watching him hold their daughter with an expression of fierce love and determination. "We did it," she said. "We built something good from terrible beginnings." "We did," Eli agreed, "and we will keep building, for her, for us, for everyone who comes after. Little Dove opened her eyes dark like her mother's, and looked at her father with the unfocused gaze of the newly born. In that moment Eli made a promise. He would teach her that people were complicated, that good people could do terrible things, that terrible mistakes did not have to define entire lives. That redemption was not erasure, but rather the long, hard work of choosing better every day. He would teach her that some wounds never fully healed, but some loves were born from the scars. And that was enough. That was everything. Outside the lodge, spring sun melted the last snow, revealing earth ready for planting. The valley stirred with renewed life. Children played, elders told stories, young people made plans, all of it continuing, all of it building, all of it proving that survival was possible, and joy was real, and hope was not foolish. The past remained. It always would. But the future stretched ahead, unknown and challenging and full of possibility. And for the first time in 6 years, Elijah Carson looked at that future without fear, surrounded by family he had chosen and who had chosen him back, holding his daughter and his wife's hand, knowing that this finally was home.